In the social reality, despite all changes, the domination of man by man is still the historical continuum that links pre-technological and technological reason. However, the society which projects and undertakes the technological transformation of nature alters the base of domination by gradually replacing personal dependence of the slave on the master, the serf on the lord of the manor, the lord on the donor of the fief, etc., with dependence on the objective order of things, on economic laws and markets, etc. To be sure, the objective order of things is itself the result of domination, but it is nevertheless true that domination now generates a higher rationality, that of a society which sustains its hierarchical structure while exploiting ever more efficiently the natural and mental resources, the distributing the benefits of the exploitation on an ever larger scale. The limits of this rationality and its sinister force appear in the progressive enslavement of man by a productive apparatus which perpetuates the struggle for existence and extends it to the truly international struggle which ruins the lives of those who build and use this apparatus. I was just reading to you this book, The One-Dimensional Man by Herbert Marcuse. Maybe you haven't heard of Herbert Marcuse, but maybe you've heard of cultural Marxism. Not everybody has heard of cultural Marxism, but cultural Marxism is an increasingly common phrase that is used in politics today to refer to social trends, liberal social trends. And I think maybe the appeal of that term, cultural Marxism, is to connect the social liberal trends with the Marxist regime, the Soviet Union, and Maoist China. But there's a lot more to it, you know. Cultural Marxism is, it's sort of a derogatory term, but it's attributed to what was called the Frankfurt School. And the Frankfurt School, they weren't studying economics, they were studying society, capitalist society, and they were criticizing capitalism for the society, the culture that it produced. And one of the lead theorists of the Frankfurt School was Herbert Marcuse. You know, you know, he has two major books. One is Arrows and Civilization, and this one, The One-Dimensional Man. And thing is, I haven't really read Arrows and Civilization, but you know, Arrows means like sex drive. It's the Greek god Ares, and its relation to sex drive and civilization. You know, so you know, I've read the summaries, and I guess the book is about how civilization suppresses sex drive, and it's weird because sex drive shouldn't be, should be it's suppressed, but also it's weird because capitalism, he's saying capitalism suppresses sex drive, but capitalism exploits sex drive, right? Because sex sells, right? So, I mean, that's interesting. So, but the thing is that I think for Herbert Marcuse, maybe sex was like, maybe he was wrong about that, There's all these, like, sex is when he was writing, maybe it wasn't, it wasn't what it is today, but today it's, sex itself, I think, has become kind of oppressive, as a means of selling products, maybe, or producing unwed motherhood or abortion or all these type of things. In the case of maybe unwed motherhood, maybe a blessing in disguise, but still not, preferred. Not preferred that it would be all just no limits, which maybe seems like what Herbert Marcuse was trying to get at. And it makes you wonder, like, was Herbert Marcuse completely unrestrained himself sexually? That's not possible. Like, the thought of it makes you think maybe there were like cover-ups or something that we don't know about. Like, maybe there were some sex scandals, if there were the tabloid magazines of the day, maybe we would see that on the cover, at the grocery store, and we try to avert our eyes and suppress that desire to indulge in the lower gossipy impulse, but we'd see there Herbert Marcuse and this sex scandal or something. It's a weird thought that the left would be founded on the unleashing of the sex drive, from like Freudian analysis to Herbert Marcuse and cultural Marxism, and that when today so much of the left is reinserting the morality of cultural restraint, of sexual restraint, back into culture, which is it's positive. That's positive, no matter where it comes from. We need to stop rape culture. That's not at all an exaggeration. Any culture that promotes rape or makes rape more easy or thinkable needs to be suppressed. And it's weird to think, that the cultural Marxists, that Herbert Marcuse would be trying to unleash that kind of thing. It's weird. And maybe he was, but maybe he was trying to get at something else, and maybe it's worth trying to think about what other things he was trying to get at. And I think, from this book, One Dimensional Man, I read it, and, I didn't really get this idea that capitalism was preventing unrestrained sex drive or something. I knew it was there, but that wasn't really what I got from it. What I got more from this book, One Dimensional Man, was that communism is often, or socialism is often depicted as an anti-individualistic idea that is imposed by a government to get rid of individualism, and that Herbert Marcuse, in a way, is saying that it's actually capitalism that diminishes individualism, and the way that capitalism diminishes individualism is by giving a limited number of choices and tying identity and your very being, your essence, as Heidegger would say, your being in the world with others as a replacing that, your soul, with an identity of commodities, an identity of possessions, and that in that way you really connect your identity with all these other people who just own the same random things as you, regardless if you have anything real in common, any soul connection, any spiritual connection, And that's what I kind of was getting from it. That capitalism, on the contrary, it isn't necessarily communism that suppresses the individual uniqueness, but it's actually capitalism that suppresses the individual's uniqueness. I think that's actually a really good idea, and it's a good idea for leftists to think about, even as the left kind of moves away from the kind of Freudian. That's where the sexual revolution came from, was Freud. The idea that repression, that sexuality is really irrepressible, and if you repress it, bad things will happen. The left's really moving away from that, and I think that it's underrated, the benefit of that, the benefit of moving away from that false idea. But even as the left moves away from the idea of unleashing sexuality, and towards a sort of unleashing of identity, which may have its own problems, but I think that we should at least recognize the value of moving away from the unleashing of sexual drive. It's a really bad idea to think that sexual drive should be more important than thinking about what is actually needed in a relationship and that kind of thing, So in that regard, the left is moving it's doing the right thing, But we could also focus on some of these other good aspects of Herbert Marcuse, and it's Herbert Marcuse is actually a great anti-bureaucratic thinker of the left, and that's often overlooked. And by bureaucracy, they're not really just talking about emails and phone calls and things like that, but more to do with protocol, and that the person that you're talking to, when you receive a service in a capitalist society is not necessarily the person who's thinking. The whole we're a cog in the machine type thing, you know. It's often overlooked that the Frankfurt School is really criticizing that element of depersonalization within capitalism. And it's a sort of, what they were kind of seeing is that it was a sort of commodification of a person's place in society, because it's not just that the items that we buy that are sort of interchangeable, but it's us, and the services that we provide are also interchangeable. And then that's what they were calling rationality, like or the technological rationality, and they get this idea of like technological rationality from a philosopher named Max Weber. And Max Weber is very interesting because he's sort of a connecting point of the libertarian thought through Hayek and Mises, and also the Frankfurt School of the left, Marcuse and Walter Benjamin and people like that. So he's an interesting person. He's the great connector of anti-bureaucratic thought from the left and from like right libertarians. And of course there's an anti-bureaucratic thought within right-wing thought too, which is really interesting because, you know, here's the thing is that, you know, there are left-wing thinkers who aren't counter-bureaucratic, you know, but the Frankfurt School was, and so it's interesting that a lot of sort of anti-bureaucratic conservatives are criticizing cultural Marxism now, because that's sort of their twin brother in a way, because cultural Marxism really is, that's why it's sort of a proliferation of identity, is because it's an effort to break from the techno rationalization of identity, you know. And it's that whole thing that goes back into punk rock and all that, where it's like, you know, I'm not just my job, I'm not just my job title, I'm a human being. That comes from the Frankfurt School. That comes from people like Herbert Marcuse on the left, you know. And that's, you know, it seems strange to call that cultural Marxism, but that's cultural Marxism, you know. And I think there's a value to that conservatives and leftists can embrace and sort of build. And why not find a unity in that and build a bridge there if possible. I mean, I don't know if it's possible to build a bridge there, but I think it's worth a thought. It's worth thinking about, and it's worth a try. But that's, you know, that's sort of the positive side of, or the good side, because positive in philosophy has a different meaning. Like positivism really is connected with this techno-rationalistic thing too. But you know, this is the good side of cultural Marxism that I'd like people to consider. You know, as this debate over cultural Marxism continues to deepen, and the contribution of people like Jordan Peterson continues to become more and more mainstream. That the left actually does have a tradition of countering conformity and techno-rationalistic thought, you know. And that's really what these, like, and that's the irony of this, is that that's what these sort of restraints on language really are. They really are a misadventure of cultural Marxism, because they really are a techno-rationalistic approach to the liberation of identity, you know, and it doesn't really have to be that way. So I was just like, maybe we can get along. Maybe we can think about this and find new ways to approach the exploration of identity that isn't imposing through a state bureaucratic form and doesn't sort of codify so much, but tries to find liberation maybe in really cultural ways, you know, even if it's Marxist, maybe cultural Marxist ways, you know, not cultural Marxism as we're starting to see it, but a different kind of cultural Marxism, and not Marxism, you know, maybe a proliferation of conservative identity might be interesting at this point. A proliferation of traditional spiritual identity, that might be interesting too. And see how, you know, and let it interact. Bring on the arguments. See what happens. Thanks. That's what I have to say about Herbert Marcuse tonight. Have fun.